gracious of him to make up for time that had been lost in earlier sessions. Well, the topic that we have is a bit wide. We are speaking about beyond borders, navigating the fast-changing economic landscape. I'll stop at that because the topic goes on to say navigating the fast-changing economic landscape and its interconnectedness with emerging classes, but we won't get into the class war. It may be difficult to manage that in the 45 minutes that Shamika and Professor Seal have over here. So we'll try and look at the emerging economic landscape and the challenges it faces, especially the challenges that emerge beyond the borders, both state borders and national borders. So Shamika, let me start with you, not merely because you have to catch a flight, but you're the one connected with policy over here. So how do policymakers view the emerging economic challenges? If you can briefly outline which are the top 3 challenges that policymakers are looking at.
So thank you, Latha, and thank you to SBI for this opportunity. It's always wonderful to get out of Delhi. You know, the EAC is perhaps not a very well known body in terms of how we work. We basically report to the Prime Minister and the PMO. We are not outward facing, so a lot of the work we do is really for internal consumption. We do not work with states. We do not work with ministries. So basically it is a role where we think and we deliberate and we give real-time input where required. And we often get asked to do very specific work. So let me tell you in terms of some of the key areas where we are focusing right now. The one which is at least on top of my mind is the situation with the state finances today. And it is a precarious situation because the electoral politics basically lends itself to a race to the bottom sometimes. And we have seen, if you look at the state spending and the nature of the spending over the last X number of years. So see, unlike public finance people who are on the platform with me, as an empiricist, I have the luxury of not looking at it from a very precise deficit concern. I look at it much more from the point of view of where is the money going and is the allocation efficient. So if you look at the non-development to the development spending of several states, it's becoming troublesome. One state, of course, has also gone to the Supreme Court, claiming the center is wrecking its finances and so on. But, you know, the data is where we have to look, and I strongly encourage, to those of you interested in this, we put out a report in May. It's called the State of the State Finances. What it does is it looks at 30-year real per capita trends. And there you see certain things emerging very clearly. Within the non-development spending, pensions, administrative spending, and of course interest and debt burden. And I think the last category is of specific interest to this room. You see, not all states are equally credit-worthy if you see their conduct and their spending, which lends itself to 2 policy intervention. One is from the point of how do we make them better disciplined? What aspect of policy will make states more responsible and spend in a way which is sustainable, right? The second is supporting states with better management practices itself. That is a different role. So there is a function here for the 16th Finance Commission, and then there is a function for a body, I would imagine, like the Niti Aayog, because we have a state support unit there, where states are basically told that, look, this is the way administrative burden has been brought down, or this is the way a particular state has managed. And just to give you an example, over the last 20, 30 years, some states are actually doing much better than their immediate compatriots, if I were to, right? So this is where we begin to compare states like Bihar and Odisha. Bihar was actually marginally richer than Odisha 24 years back. Today, Odisha is 3 times richer. So that tells you where policy and what kind of governance. The other is, if you compare small, relatively homogeneous, similar states, Himachal and Uttarakhand. Himachal was nearly twice as rich 20 years back. Today, Uttarakhand has taken over, right? It's outcompeted. So it's just to tell you that there are lessons. Some states will need that additional help, and I think the lessons don't have to come from elsewhere. They are really with the neighbors and the other country, other states which are managing better. So I think there is that one element of which is a huge concern. The second is, in terms of the green finance that Sachin, was talking about, we need financing for many of our SDG goals. Climate is one of them, and I think with the social stock exchange coming into being, we of course have to populate it, not just with institutions, but also finances. We need better instruments, Latha, and I think that is where industry has to support. We really need to go beyond some of the obvious ones. MP as a state was quite far-sighted in actually announcing a 1,000 crore impact fund, right? Just like the Indian government announces a $25 million social impact fund, really meant to attract other countries also into basically cooperating and adding to that corpus in order to help either take our technology, the DPIs, to the rest of the world, or with other SDGs where we are completely aligned, etc. So there are these, second order. I don't think these are first order anymore. We have reached the second order stage. The third is, of course, the skilling gap. We know, and I don't know how many people in the room know, that, our most educated people in the population are nearly 5 times as likely to be unemployed as our least educated people. And this is particularly true amongst the youth, people under 30. So the fact that, and simultaneously industry is also telling you finance is not the constraint. Human resource or skilled manpower is our biggest constraint. The two things coexist, basically skilling is required. But one of the constraints in skilling and expansion of skilling program is credit. We really have, in the priority sector, got to prioritize even within that on skilling and certain revenue models which are working. And lastly, not because I'm a woman and I want to pay lip service to it, but what Sachin also mentioned, women-led development and what it means. In the government, we are actually we're coming up with a care economy strategy. Women's labor force participation in India, if you look at the last 5 PLFSs, it is rising. But it is nowhere at the level where we want it to be. But women are getting more and more skilled than ever before. So there is so much skill that is trapped in the household. Basically because, on an average, a working age woman in India is spending 5 hours taking care of somebody, either the child or the elderly. We think we are a young country, but we have 120 million people above the age of 60, which is also going to increase very fast. We have to make serious investment into care economy. And again, finance is one part of the story, but this will require an entire, and that is what we are in the. So those are the 4 key areas, and I think where at least, me and the team and the EAC, we are working on.
Oh, absolutely. I would think increasing the female labor participation would be very, very key if we have to encash our demographic dividend. The comparable numbers in United States or China, the 2 other large economies, is 65% and closer to 70% for China. Whereas we are lingering between 40 and 50. Even if we take definitional changes, it's 50. If we have strict definitions, then we are even lower at 40 in terms of female labor participation. Unless that participation comes, the demography is wasted. So that point is well taken. But let me just expand the border of the topic, because it's the given topic. It says beyond borders, navigating the economic challenges. Now, beyond borders, the first challenge that is staring us in the face are the geopolitical challenges. Professor Chakraborty spoke about the way in which we are trying to get the global south together, but the reality is that geopolitics is divisive, and it is probably going to eat into global productivity, global trade, and therefore global GDP. I mean, even if you look at the GDP growth, global GDP growth in the 2000s, the first decade, and the last 10 years, it's a fall of about at least 1 percentage point. We were ranging well over 4% in the first decade, and now the average, this year, of course, the IMF forecast 1.9%, but it could be, even on an average lower. So, Professor Seal, really that question to you. Is the biggest challenge going to be to try and gain more market share? Because the pie is not growing like the way it grew when China was harvesting its economic dividend. At the moment, do you fear that the global trade pie itself is shrinking? And if it is, how do we gain a larger share?
Yeah, of course it is. The reason being, if you see, Europe is in a recession. So, if you see our exports, especially if you want to capture the pie, global pie, so we are depending only on US. So, at this moment, that is the only market. And when China was growing, we cannot compare our infrastructure with China. There are a lot of discussion on infrastructure. But, so recently we have done a project for shipping industry. So, because during the COVID, there was a total supply chain, disruption. So, today only I read a report that, bringing steel from Rotterdam port to Mumbai cost less than bringing steel from Jamshedpur to Mumbai. But if you talk about goods, cargo which comes in container, that is not the case. Because all over the world, the transportation cost has drastically gone down, and that is one of the major reason for the development of international trade. But at the same time, if you see recent times, especially after COVID, there is a huge shortage of container. So can India manufacture container? Our total production per year is 10,000 units. China, the largest factory, produces 2 million units per year. Cost per container in India is, the lowest can be 4,100, somewhere around $4,100. China, it is $2,300. So this is the difference. So if you want to take the pie, you have to be competitive also, number one. So we have a scope, we have an advantage. And definitely, I also believe in hopes. So it is not that we cannot do it. Definitely, pre-launch session, Mr. Shanal pointed out that definitely we can, try. And if we try, definitely we can do it. And we can also take the advantage of demographic dividend, and we are, especially State Bank of India and all the other public sector banks, they are also doing a lot for the, especially for MSME financing, and MSMEs are backbone of any country. So if you see 90% of our exporters are MSMEs, okay, but their total volume might be 10%. So if you want to take the, a larger share, so the most important thing what you need to do is to train the MSMEs, to make them understand that we need to export, and we need to export for our survival.
Yeah, I would assume that that's a massive task ahead. But let me just toss it back, since we have a policy person or a person connected to policy over here. How does the government view this? I mean, we just got yesterday the current account deficit numbers. FDI is all of 4 billion, April to September, much lower than the 19 billion last year. It's not only our problem. FDI globally has been falling, but we have been hoping that we are the China plus one, and therefore FDI going down elsewhere should mean gain for us. It's not happening. So, Shamika, on that point, what's the policy thinking? Are you also worrying that the global trade pie is shrinking, and whether we have not yet cut a larger market share?
Latha, I think we have to be a bit pragmatic and accept the fact that until 10 years back, if you were in Delhi or perhaps policy groupings, like, gatherings like this, everybody was saying India has missed manufacturing bus. So let's be realistic. We have only begun to put serious effort into manufacturing in the last 8-9 years, because services is what was really propelling most of our exports.
I'm hoping that we are also we have boarded the services exports bus in a very big way last 2-3 years.
Yes.
With GCCs,
yes.
etc.
Yes.
So I'm just, whether there is a joint concern about this global pie not quite coming our way as we
Well, here, no, so what I was getting to with that is that, the logic behind that is China losing its competitive advantage, particularly vis-a-vis labor. But remember that there is a very large global market which is not limited to OECD. Africa is growing, Latin America is growing, the rest of Asia is growing. So that manufacturing or, whatever FDI is going into, those products, the demand at a global level is only going to rise, Latha. And which means that, even if we have been delayed in our focus on these sectors, it's a matter of time. Right? Now, this is where this whole ease of doing business, I mean, the reason state after state, there is so much jostling to really attract is all in the right direction. Yes, the magnitude is perhaps not the level where one is expecting. And I think, again, comparisons with Vietnam, Bangladesh, these are relatively smaller and homogeneous economies. You really should compare yourselves to either China at a particular point in time, the US at a particular, and perhaps Brazil. So you need large federal sort of structures with many industries, many sectors, which are jostling for this kind of, that's the real comparison. Otherwise, smaller homogeneous markets make you always look tardy and, right? So I think...
No, I take your point. It's just that China had the advantage when it was in the 90s of a growing economy. And
let's also be, again, very honest. There will not be a repeat of China's story because the world has woken up to what it has led to, right? You're not going to see the OECD markets deliberately blindfold themselves and walk into this 20 years of WTO, whatever it has led. So that's not going to happen. India is not going to be faced with similar, if you call it opportunities, but I think what is working for us is slower, but I think it's far more sustainable in keeping with also the global order. You know, we are seen as a friendlier country. We are able to do a lot of work as against China in also leveraging that international.
No, absolutely. I think the Chinese
Just one point to add.
But, so if I may add the question, you please make your point. But whether you're confident that we can make a big splash on services, because I've been looking at the monthly services number. After peaking at $30 billion in Jan, it has remained at $28, $29 billion. I mean, we are now, what, November? And the number is not growing. So have we already peaked in services? What's your thought? And plus your own point, yes.
Yeah, first is, as I've already told you, that is, there is only, now it is among the developed countries only US. Okay. So Europe, it is already in a recession, and, and Philippines is, has developed a lot. It may not be as close to as we do. And this is my personal feeling, you may not agree, that is, fall in FDI may be temporary, because if you see the interest rate differential is very less, and bond yield in US has gone up like anything. Okay. So at this moment, FDI, I don't expect much, but we are also going to cut rate of interest definitely.
Yeah. Okay. No, I take your point. We did see a gush of FDI in 2020 and 21 because of the lose money policy in the US, and our startups were advantaged. But that turned out to be a one-year Diwali. It's obviously not something which we can all compare normal times. But let me come to the internal macros. Professor Bhanumurthy, and you were closely involved with this in the capex cycle that the government has tried to kickstart impressive rise of 30% in government capex in FY24. But we don't see early signs of it handing over the baton to private capex. And we can't be a 9% fiscal deficit for long. I mean, we could have taken the liberty this year, but in FY25, it has to come down at least to 8% or, thereabouts. So is that one of the big challenges? Private capex taking over from public capex?
Yeah, I think when we did this analysis, we expected that, when there is a public capital expenditure happens, and there could be some kind of crowding in impact on the private investments. But I think the way it happened for the past 3 years, I think the private sector seems to be still expecting much more investment coming from the government sector, both from the center as well as states. So there seems to be some kind of a hesitancy from the private sector to pitch in the part of the whole recovery process. But as you rightly pointed out, I think the story of the only one engine working for recovery process may not last long. And I think you need to really revert back to your original FRBM Act, and you need to bring down your fiscal deficit as they plan to bring the fiscal deficit to 4.5% by 26. I think that should give space for the private investment. So, I mean, there are some initial indication that, private investments are picking up. But I think still, in a way, if you look at the investment is not just a function of public investment or the interest rates, but I think it's a long-term perception of the overall economy. Right now, I think India is better placed compared to any other countries. I think we should be looking at more both domestic private investment as well as FDI in the coming years.
You know, for the past 5 policies or maybe 10 policies, the governor has been saying when he makes an assessment of the economy that we are at capacity utilization of 74 or 75, close to the long-term average. Soumya, your thoughts? I mean, it should have triggered, isn't it? CapEx, but the growth, I think, is largely retail growth. We see a loan growth of 16%, which is an improvement over the 8% that we had 2 years ago, but it looks like largely retail-led.
No, I think the story on the retail is well taken, but in terms of a private investment, as Bhanumurthy was pointing out, I think there has been a revival in private investment. For example, if I look into our bank's pipeline in terms of the sanctions which are in pipeline, I think they are quite healthy. And there are several sectors which are actually new age sectors. So that actually takes time for the private investment to kick in. One of the examples is data centers. So that is one area which has been, other is renewables. So these are all forcible, and there are also other sectors like battery, electronic vehicles, so chemicals. So some of these sectors are actually new age or sunrise sectors. So whenever a private investment would like to come in, it may take a little time to gauge it. But my sense is that given this and given the spate of announcements which has happened in the last year, if you look into some of the reports which are available in public domain in terms of investment announcements, and even if 35 to 40% of that is realized, that gives you a healthy figure. The second point is that there is a very interesting story behind this investment. If you break up India's public and private investment, the data for which is available till 23 data will be available in January when the CSO releases the data, you will find that the most interesting aspect of the investment is that it's the institution, the public sector institution, which has been actually lacking in terms of the investment. And that has been a significant laggard. In the last 1 year, that has picked up. And my sense is that once that picks up, if I look into just incremental share of the investment, not the percentage of GDP, I think that is one thing which could be driving up the overall investment climate. So my sense is that first, yes, private investment has started to come, but it will take time because there are sunrise sectors which takes time. Second is that it's the institutions and not the government. Government is driving it. It's
so PSUs have not been as active as the government.
As active as they should have been.
Okay. Shamika, any thoughts on that from a policymakers? I mean, is there a worry that the government has done its bit? And this year, even the state capex has picked up. But we are not seeing the private capex of the kind that we have seen in the first decade of this century, or of the thing that we would like it to be?
I think it's a matter of time, Latha, because the general mood is upbeat. And unlike, if you look at the IMF data over the last 40, 50 years, unlike elsewhere, usually government capex has a crowding in impact in India of private, right? Unlike elsewhere where we are often worried that when government spends more, there is less available for private. But here, I think it's a matter of, again, I'll go back to the last 10 years, because we've had such a sustained period, right? From the coal allocations to the retrospective tax. I think private sector has been through a lot.
Yes.
And then, of course, the pandemic. I mean, I think it's a matter of we shouldn't get discouraged. But the point is, if you just look at the last few quarters, we are sensing a turnaround. Now, some of it could be self-financed, maybe it's not coming to the banks, but there is a turnaround. The magnitude could be different.
No, it could be self-financing. I mean, I remember, I think I am a veteran of at least 2 major economic cycles. And I remember the Rakesh Mohan speech, 2005, lazy banking. So the initial period, 2005, it was internal retained profits that companies were plowing in, and memories of the high NPAs of late 90s was very green even for corporate sector. So perhaps, we should only hold out our patience, but that clearly seems to be an issue. And on that point, let me come to the fisc. Again, the question I asked Professor Bhanumurthy. We will have to see the fisc pull back. I mean, this is a jolly good number, a 7.2%. It's better than, the most optimistic estimates I got when I was doing my poll, way better than what one would assume is a conservative estimate from a conservative central bank. 6.5% was their forecast, and we've done 7.2, but we have to accept that there are steroids, a 9% fiscal deficit. We also must accept that the US, the same quarter, grew by 5.2%. I think now it's scaled down to 4.9. But nevertheless, it's an extraordinary performance that has helped. Now, if the fisc pulls back, what would your worry be? And Lekha, should the fisc pull back? Because the US is challenging even that orthodoxy.
Yeah, thank you. Should not pull back.
Should not.
Fiscal policy should remain accommodative. Because, there is no worry about the investors' confidence at all. We have fiscal deficit high, we have debt very high. But the clear narrative is it is linked to the capex formation. So I think there is investors' confidence over there, as long as we get this narrative correct. So that's what I feel. But if we pull back the fiscal policy, of course the interest rate is mounting, our public debt is mounting, but if we do that, the repercussions will be severe. It will have negative growth consequences.
Lekha, I must say that you've infused fire into the conversation.
Yeah, it should
That's
keep
against all orthodoxy to say that 9% fiscal deficit is not enough. Let's go for more.
Absolutely. How you keep the narrative strong is what matters. Let deficit be good, because a timely deficit is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I take your point that the previous year's fiscal deficit was correctly utilized to write off FCI loans, to write off NHAI, or pay back NHAI loans, not write off, sorry, to pay back, and to that extent it was not inflationary. But this year's has been almost entirely been spent, and Shamika, would you agree that
Latha,
this goes against orthodoxy?
I don't know if it is because we are in a room full of bankers, but my view, again, because I'm not a public finance, this is a very creditor's way of looking at real economy. The amount you worry about.
They call the music.
Right? For the rest of us who actually worry about the real economy and long-term growth, what Lekha is saying is absolutely right. It's a narrative that matters, and there is what are the risk factors? I mean, of course, you are touching wood at this point, despite being terribly scientific about a lot of these things.
I don't know if there are debt market traders over here, or even treasury managers. Mr. Khara, another 9% announced, or in fact, Lekha wants it more. So let us assume there is another 6% vote on account fiscal deficit. Would you think that interest rates won't rise?
We'll have to look at the quality of the deficit also. It's not merely the deficit. For what purpose the deficit is. So that I think that will be the guiding factor when it comes to the interest rate movements.
I want everyone's comment. Yes, Professor Bhanumurthy.
I think the discussion seems to be on the headline fiscal deficit. But I think one thing that happened good for this country for the past 4 or 5 years is in improving the quality of expenditure. Absolutely. I think the headline fiscal deficit need not be a center of discussion for all of us. I think it is the revenue deficit. No, revenue deficit you want to have 3% or 0%. I think that the discussion should be on that rather than talking about the fiscal deficit. But I think, in my view, we have seen great period in between 2003 and 2007, and I think that all happened because of bringing down the revenue deficit to 0. So I think we need to talk about whether we need to go back to the original FRBM Act of 2003 or the amended Act which is in 2018, which has actually messed up the whole fiscal math. So I think we need to really see whether you need to improve the quality of expenditure or you want to put the money into the drain.
No, I take your point. Where the money is spent would obviously determine whether it is inflationary or not. But per se, Lekha and Shamika are propagating a fisc-led expenditure or...
No. Latha, see, that's what I'm trying to tell you, that our view of the world, at least the way we, and I don't, again, we look at the real economy, Latha. And we are very interested in basically, in fact, that's why I mentioned this report, that you have to look at the expenditure, the non-development expenditure. You're in a democracy where electoral pressures are leading to all kinds of announcements, whether you want to call it freebie or whatever, it's a choice of word. But you always have that risk. And therefore, the nature of the spending, and that's why I said that non-development spending whether the kind of borrowing, and if Kerala is knocking the doors of Supreme Court today, we really have to be worried. Why do I say that? Because Kerala's capital outlay has been below average for a very long number of. Their borrowing has been twice the national average for a very long. The pension burden has been exorbitant, right? So these are, how on earth are we going, if we only keep ourselves, if we treat public finance as a mechanical exercise, I'm sorry, that is a very, very myopic way to look. Maybe it makes better news, but no, for the economy it is terrible, because you have to look at the disease, not just the symptoms.
Okay, well, just let me try this argument a little more. We should be speaking about other issues, but since this is interesting, the center has twice the fiscal deficit of the states. It's 6%, the states are at 3%. And the center is usually incurring this deficit, not because it is spending on its subjects, which would be defense or, okay, railways, they do spend. It is incurring this expenditure because it spends on the state's subjects. Also, the center's interest component is now rising to almost 40% of the total budget revenues. The center, as a percentage of GDP as well, the interest expenditure is fairly high, highest perhaps in several years. So, is not this something we should worry about?
No, Latha, because it's a very big country. And when you say states, I'm sorry, there's an entire distribution around it. And I'm telling you that there are pockets in that distribution where we need to be worried about, right? States reverting to the old pension scheme.
Okay, that's a fair
No, it's a very big, it's not a small issue, and I'm going to hide
fair
behind
point,
the
I
deficit.
said, not small.
It's a very big issue. And Himachal, where I just give you an example, Himachal now, Uttarakhand has overtaken Himachal. 20 years is all it took, a generation. And this state has reverted to old pension. We cannot dissociate. This is where I find myself a little bit frustrated at the way public finances dealt with in public space in India. We pretend that it's a mechanical exercise. Arre, ek formula nahi hai ye. You are talking about states, about governance, and the actual impact it has on the long-term growth of the states, right? 5% of your population, very well organized 5%, is holding 95% hostage, is what we are saying. Because if you go back to old pension scheme, where do you think the money is going to come from? It's from development spending. What trade-off, bilkul, you read the report, you see it's coming out of development spending.
Absolutely.
So you're taking out money from health, from education, infrastructure, so all kinds of development, economic and social, putting it into pension. Kyun bhai? What is the point of reform? Right?
No,
so let's talk about real economy.
Shamika, I don't think there is anyone on the side of the OPS, any responsible economist at all.
No, that's just a symptom, Latha. I'm trying to tell you that when we only talk about deficit and we get fixated on this headline number, we are pushing aside such important real issues, which Bhanu is trying to tell you that nature of that spending kya hai. We need to really talk about those things to really figure out what is the situation with the public
Please
finances.
go ahead, Lekha.
Yeah. No way we said that we are away from the path of fiscal consolidation. We are moving in the path of fiscal consolidation, and we have a number. Over the years, we will reach there. And the beauty is this fiscal transition and energy transition is closely related. Even within the fiscal consolidation, the energy transition concerns are incorporated with articulating to states that your point 5 is power sector reforms. So we are not deviating a moment from the fiscal consolidation path, but the timing is very crucial, not instantaneously, but over the period of time. So that's what, what I meant. Yeah.
Asking for a longer time. Now, I take your point. It's just that the Reserve Bank's trends in banking, which was released yesterday, has also pointed out that they are terribly worried about power sector finances. The government sector, the government NBFCs, which have lent to the power sector. So I take your point that both energy transition and fiscal transition are closely related, but we seem to be scoring lower on both. Professor Bhanumurthy, you want to wind up the fiscal point and then come to the next issue? The last word?
I think in the whole fiscal analysis, it's one important variable which we completely neglect, is the public debt. I think everybody in this country should know what is the public debt of this country. We don't really talk about it. Now, if you're talking about fiscal consolidation with 5% fiscal deficit and 4% revenue deficit, I don't think you can bring down the public debt to GDP ratio anytime. Rather, it's going to increase over a period of time.
And
So
we're
I think,
sitting at 85 or 90 now.
yeah. So I think, the fiscal consolidation, I think again, with the spirit of the original FRBM Act of 2003, until unless we don't go back to that, we are not going to see a fiscal space for any development expenditure, as Shamika has talked.
Yes, Johan.
I just add one point, I think, which both of you highlighted. I think fiscal deficit by definition is a sum of disinvestment receipts, revenue deficit plus capital expenditure. So the good thing was that the revenue deficit as a proportion of fiscal deficit, that is the line item which you always see, that was coming down before the pandemic. But after the pandemic, I mean, it went up to around 70%. So at the end of the day, if this number is okay, is around 50 to below 50%, I think we are safe in terms of quality of expenditure.
Yeah. And declining.
Yes.
No, I take a point, but it will require a whole session in itself. But there is a fiscal challenge, both in terms of the headline number, in terms of the quality of spending, and definitely, schemes like the old pension scheme, much more than the other freebies, which perhaps at least is warranted. And with that, let me bring the reason why the freebies exist in first place. Is there a K-shaped recovery, Dr. Bhanumurthy, and therefore necessitating that even the central government is giving 80 crore families, 5 kilos of free grain. So that is telling you something about the pain that the government is able to see, and the political leadership should be trusted to keep its finger on the right pulse if they are telling you that. So is private capex not investing simply because there isn't purchasing power at a larger level? Would you worry about K-shaped recovery as an economic challenge?
Yeah, I think right now, we have talking about, fastest growing large economy in the world. But on the other hand, we are talking about when it comes to health and nutrition, we are very far away from many countries. I think there is a gap between the growth as well as some of the social sector. And I think there is certainly a pressure on the government to focus more on this particular issue. If you look at what happened in Madhya Pradesh, the kind of scheme that have come up, how the kind of support that schemes have been given by the people clearly suggests that there is a large role for intervention. And you're right. I think there is a kind of K-shaped recovery. I think maybe some parts of the sector's economy is actually growing much faster compared to other sectors. I think we need to have, we need to focus on that particular sector also. And that's where the whole public policy things come up.
Okay. Soumya, I think you've written against the K-shaped recovery at some point in time. But would you say that the lack of demand at a certain echelon is the reason why capex has not picked up as much as we would like it to be?
I think if you look in terms of the distribution, I think even 10 years back or say 15 years back, there was always this case that 65% of the population having 8% of the consumption. So the point is that how much that number has moved. So in our sense, I think even if we acknowledge that there has been, maybe the recovery has been not even if we are assuming that, my sense is that in the last couple of years, there has been several incentives at the bottom of the pyramid. And that is one of the reasons why today you will see that, for example, credit is the most burning example today. Bank credit growth, even after all this intervention, is still growing close to 20%. If I take out the HDFC market, it's a 15 to 16%. And a large part of the thing we believe, and we have seen that it is actually happening because of the bottom of the pyramid getting linked into the banking system. First, we had the formalization of deposits, Chandan. Then we have the formalization of credit. Who has got the deposits, they are actually now taking the credit. The Swanidhi program is an example where State Bank actually has a 31% market share. So my sense is that why, yes, even if there is, for example, a case of some sort of a record, I think there has been enough intervention which has been made to smoothen that. And my sense is that at the end of the day, if growth happens, there will be always some amount of inequality or whatever, but that should not be taken as a binding factor to say that there has been recovery, which is getting utterly K-shaped.
No, that point is well taken.
MSME sector also, if you look at the RBI data, There is an RBI currency on finance last year showed that a large part of the MSCI were actually becoming bigger. And that also we have seen in our bank books. For example, if due to the definition of the MSME sector is in terms of the service sector, if they grow bigger, they actually move into the CCG unit, which we call in our bank.
And you're seeing that transition.
Yes, that has actually happened. So there are examples. So I can also give counter examples in terms of this happening, but the reverse is always, there should always be some amount of this one if a growth is happening.
Other way to say that K-shaped recovery is constant.
Okay. No, well, I think it's gotten a bit more K than it was earlier, but I agree.
But
All growth
remember,
is unequal.
India has halved its multidimensional poverty. Half. And these are not, I mean, it's a little bit like the elephant and 6 blind men. Because the data that we are trying to really grapple with, is what it is. But the K-shaped is a bit of a bogeyman also, Latha. I think I'll tell you again from a 100-year perspective, if you consider the fact that I think the Indian economy is perhaps in the same stage as the US economy in the 1940s, when your basic growth strategies, look, you're going to invest in infrastructure in a very big way. But at the same time, you're going to make basic amenities available to every citizen everywhere in the country. Right? So roads, electricity, pipe drinking water, we made a great start, far from what we want to be, but we made a great start. LPG, bank accounts, mobile telephony, etc. Your bottom 20 quintile, 20%, your fifth quintile, has seen a doubling in terms of access to electricity, right? 56% are now almost 100% have it. In fact, India is your only country where there is no gender gap in terms of access to banking. So there are all these, there is this alternate data from the real economy, which unfortunately doesn't make its way into the financial sector conversations. And I think that is what sort of leads this conversation in a way where we are not entirely sure where we are headed. So I would strongly encourage that you do look at these data. We have been putting out a series of reports. And these are all publicly available data, and this is not government data. I'm not telling you administrative data, because government will say, sub 100% kar diya. No, we are telling you survey data. So these are households which are reporting. So if anything, this is an underestimate of the kind of growth in, improvements in multidimensional poverty that you're seeing in the country.
I would strongly urge you to request the NSO and the government to put out the consumption expenditure survey. It is the lack of that survey that is making us flounder. And speaking about financial sector data, I would always look at the fact that Titan and Indian Hotels has seen a 300% jump, whereas Tata Consumer and Hindustan Unilever have barely moved. So clearly, staples didn't do well and discretionaries did well, which is giving the impression that the top, those who buy jewelry or stay in 5-star hotels have increasingly shown much more consumption. The rate of growth of consumption is much higher than the rate of growth of staples. So those are, some anecdotal data that is worrying. But Lekha, you wanted to add to it?
Not really. I was thinking, all these times about this poly crisis we talk about, because the theme of our panel is about the poly
please
crisis.
Go ahead.
So I was thinking that even the states internalize that poly crisis concept, that we need to go ahead with the climate crisis, the debt restructuring crisis. So that's the only point.
No, fair point. Actually, I was coming to that
theme.
If we have spoken about K-shaped recovery as a potential challenge, let's come to the other challenge, which is staring at in the face, and which, even Dr. Chakraborty spoke about, the climate challenge. In the first place, should we believe that climate is reducing potential growth globally, reducing trade globally? Professor Seal, would you think that it is as bad as that?
It is bad, definitely, and if not, whether it has already reduced or not, it is definitely going to reduce, because we are one country, definitely we are very much affected by the climate change. And it's winter, there are flood in Tamil Nadu. Okay, so and till we depend a lot on agriculture. So we cannot deny this fact that our agriculture is very much affected by the climate. So unless we do something, and it is not only India, it is all over the world, and unless we do something, to my mind 2070 is a long time, definitely. So we have policymakers who can throw some light on this. And definitely climate change is going to affect international trade.
Okay. As a macroeconomist, sir, would you say that it's already hurting potential growth? I mean, both India and global?
Yeah, I think there are some studies that have come up even during the COP28 discussion also. The climate change has actually, reduced GDP growth in countries like India, emerging market economies by something like 2 percentage points. So I think it looks like alarming, but the way things are happening in the world, particularly if you look at what's happening in Europe and other countries, I think it's for real now. I think we need to really, and I mean, as Chief Economic Advisor pointed out, we're already into that game. So we're already started contributing to that whole debate and also contributing to how to reduce that adverse impacts. So I think that needs to be part and parcel of the whole macro policies right now. So again, it has to start from the states. Maybe I think the states need to focus more on the climate-related issues.
Okay. Lekha, yeah, go ahead.
You know, so there is data on this, and we'll be putting out a report very soon that the frequency of natural disasters have risen. And we are particularly looking at our 40 different cities to measure resilience, meaning once you're hit, by the way, not all natural disasters, flooding in particular has actually increased a great deal. And you want to see, one, that it is there is a reality, but the point is what is the resilience in terms of how quickly do we get back? And there are different data sets which allow you to do that, whether it's night lights or you have GPS now, a lot of satellite imaging data which is getting used to see that how soon do cities get back to similar economic activity after being hit by a shock, which is a decent measure of resilience. And we are seeing that, that is where the interventions will be required, and I dare say there will be a lot of financial instruments, innovation at that level, product design, where we will have to come up with better insurance, etc. To incorporate these kind of things, and also at a city level. Because I think the city finances, I mean, we think India ends with the states,
yes,
because but the real problem is city finances and the way cities are getting governed. So perhaps, when the next government comes, one of the big priorities will be urban local bodies and the
absolutely,
and the financing.
And it's also part of the, it's also part of the Finance Commission devolution package already. So it's already there in there.
Yes, it has made, but we still don't have the taxonomy, which is why we are not very sure what will count as climate financing. I think the bankers are also stuck over there. At what point can we call this climate financing and therefore make it entitled for, concessional finances or special financing? But if I can extend this, there was an excellent paper by Professor Ashok Gulati a couple of years ago, where he said that our agrarian policy needs to be tailored for our climatic pluses and minuses. And we are not a water-rich country in that sense, if you look at it in a per capita sense. And we are exporting rice, which is one of the most water-heavy products. We often export sugar, which is an extremely groundwater tapping, crop. So, Shamika, on that, are there any changing macroeconomic policy? Because this challenge
there is. And in fact, Punjab becomes a very important case study, and that is where again it's a reality check. 40 years, all economies across political spectrum have agreed we needed the farm laws. Punjab, I don't know how many of you know, has seen active deindustrialization. While the rest of the country is trying to do ease of doing business, they have pretty much lost all their industry because agriculture has to be cross-subsidized at a level which is not sustainable. What is the outcome of course, they are growing rice. I mean, forget the rest of the country. I mean, we exporting rice. Punjab growing rice. Punjab growing rice because, I mean, we know what the policies are. The point is, it is not only leading to immediate budgetary crisis, because industries are leaving, etc., or have left, but desertification of the state. Punjab is actually, the water table has fallen to such an extent, and this is why perhaps I think the way we measure MSP itself has to look at long-term costs. Declining, why has MSP also become a mechanical exercise? That we just put 50% and give it to the farmer. So what I mean is, the problem now we will have to handle like hold the bull with the horns. Right?
No, that is a problem which probably everyone understands and knows that it has to be one day handled. But even in national policy, for instance, sugar exports, I mean, if anything, the molasses argument is being brought down. we should never be using sugar for energy because it is so water consuming. You know, that is the more fundamental argument against using molasses for energy. So, is that an important challenge that we have to pin into?
It is. And let me also assure you, this is very much on the table. These are part of the conversation because energy and soil, you know, ecologically, these things have to be sustainable. And these are all well measured inputs that are making their way into policies right now.
Lekha, you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, we have the National Adaptation Communication. The first National Adaptation Communication was done last year, and 8 components in the budget were calculated for identifying how much our government is spending for the climate change commitments. But this fragmented approach needs to be, you know, changed, and we need to have a clear climate finance statement, because on the other hand, the monetary policy in the morning, we have seen that they are very quite reluctant to get into the climate finance commitments. Greening of monetary policy is getting delayed because stress test is getting delayed. So ecological fiscal transfer by the 16th Finance Commission and the Ministry of Finance commitments in terms of the climate responsive budgeting, these will be crucial. It will be a fiscal because it's political economy. Monetary policy will be reluctant to get into the political economy.
Yes,
of
until the fiscal
finance.
architecture is
absolutely
ready.
Another small point to bear in mind that again, we are a very big country and some states are actually quite entrepreneurial because they are not going to play the GDP game. They know that they're not going to be able to compete with Gujarat, Maharashtra, etc. And we also want them not to compete, meaning we want them to preserve their green cover and biodiversity, etc. Which means now, you know, some of them, particularly if you look at MP and Meghalaya, they are doing district-wise mapping of the green cover and biodiversity. Which means now it is for the financial sector to design and index instruments so that we actually pay for this. Right? So what we are talking internationally, some of it is also valid within the country, and states are actually doing their bit to put that information.
One entity is fairly high in the race, and that is the people who have convened this conference. I understand that SBI already has mapped the entire country in terms of, you know, the climate pluses and minuses, the climate cost and benefit. If any of the SBI chairman or MDs would explain to us what's been done and what is the ask in terms of climate financing. What do you want in terms of the Reserve Bank, in terms of rules, or the Ministry of Finance for lending? Anyone who wishes to speak on it. I heard you, sir.
I thought the panel is on the stage, but nevertheless. So, as Latha explained, we have mapped the pin code-wise our portfolio of loans and collaterals against the larger loans to and married that into the Indian Meteorological Organization's climate map to tell us where we have the flooding risk, where we have the water risk. So the risk part is mapped. After that, the next step is what do we do about it? So now that we know this, the next step is to make sure that we can't really stop lending in any of these pin codes. So how do we cover everything with a proper insurance cover, which is not a very optimal solution, but necessary. So that's the next step, which we are working on to, while we have standard insurance policies, but in these cases, maybe a better quality or a higher threshold may be there. The next step, which we haven't yet finalized, is to see, can we go beyond this to look at building codes itself, the standard building codes for that pin code, and are they implemented in the proper spirit? Normally, we don't see that as long as the map is passed. So those are the thought processes, a long way of, it's a systemic thing. It can't be done by one bank or one entity, etc. So those are the thought processes. Thank you.
So clearly, the banking system has somewhat done its homework. At least 1/3 of the banking system has done its homework in terms of pin code-wise pluses and minuses or cost-benefit of the climate. Now, since there is a flight to catch, I usually like to end sessions on economy before we throw it to the audience with a rapid round. And this has to be a one number. Okay, what would your best guess be for economic GDP growth this year and FY25? So 2 numbers from you, Lekha.
Wow, it all depends upon the policy responses. If it's correct, then 7 to 8%.
Okay.
Yeah.
7 to 8% next year?
Yeah.
Oh, that's extremely encouraging. Shamika, your best guess.
You know, I don't play this game. I've never done it. I don't want to get
But
into
I
it.
gave a disclaimer. It all depends on the policy responses.
There are
Yeah.
caveats, so.
But I like the number.
Okay, so can I see that you go with 7 to 8% next year? Okay. Professor Seal,
With election coming, 6.4,
now this is for FY25 or FY24?
24.
Okay, FY24, the RBI is at 6.5, so you have some company there. But Shamika, you didn't give me an FY24 number. It's not a game. I mean, 9 months is done.
I'm not.
You are talking about 23, 24. I'm talking about 24, 25 with 6.4.
Okay, all right.
But then the elections will be done, so we have to think of
Something else.
Forecasting errors will be there.
No, I take all that, but I just wanted a number. Okay, for FY23, 24 then. Since we are 9 months in, I mean, I'm not asking you a really hypothetical.
7.
7. Oh, very good. Shamika?
Continue. You see, you'll get to a mean.
Shamika?
No.
Not guessing. Okay. Lekha? For the current year? No? Okay. Professor Banu.
Yeah, I'm in this game for quite some time now.
Yes.
So I
It's
generally
your
go
game
with
entirely.
RBI.
Sorry.
I'll generally go
you
with
defer
RBI.
to RBI.
Yes.
Okay. So 6.5. Soumya?
We had already said at the beginning of the year, we had 7%, we had there.
Okay, all right. The RBI has upgraded it to 7%. On that optimistic note, we have time for perhaps one question. They have to sit in their car by 4:40. So you have about 10 minutes, but you can be graceful to them and let them go scot-free. Yeah, there is hand. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, panel. One question. Is there any plan on the annual, ma'am, Shamika ma'am, is there any plan on the annual to do a credit rating exercise for states?
No, it's on.
You'll be surprised how many times I have broached this conversation since today morning I got into this hall. We must do it. Simply because it hasn't been done in a way I kind of understand in the past. But, and again, my co-panelist here tells me, you said Kerala, why didn't you say West Bengal? You know, it's not a matter of one state. Kerala, West Bengal, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh. There is a list.
Right.
And it cannot
This
be
year
a
the
race
worst.
to the bottom.
It's going to be.
It's a race to the bottom. And we need the market disciplines.
Yeah. So I belong to the debt market, ma'am. So hence the question, because generally all these flaws get kind of covered up by the umbrella backing of the central government in the perception of the market.
You see, that's the beauty of the federal system.
Yeah.
But we know that within, and that's why when we talk of all of government debt, no, we'll have to bring in market discipline.
Yes.
No, actually, the market discipline doesn't work here because the Reserve Bank escrows the money of the state governments, and therefore it has the SLDs have SLR status. The SDLs have SLR status because the Reserve Bank takes away the money. State governments often don't pay salaries on time, but they will pay their interest on time, which is why the market behaves the way it behaves. The market is not being irrational there.
There is a paper on this one which says that states which may have a worse fiscal position, like larger states, actually could get a better price discovery on their loans because of this one.
Yeah.
So it's basically there is to be asymmetry.
But no state unites
Yes.
to tell the Reserve Bank,
Exactly.
remove me from the escrow. You know, so everyone wants to fall back on that escrow net. Any other? Actually, it's a great question, but the credit rating agencies have to rate them as good as any SLR because of the RBI guarantee.
Can I because it's going to be very controversial, because what holds our country is a cooperative federalism, and this is going to bring in a very powerful bargaining from the states, especially the South Indian states, and it's going to be very political if we get into this. So the 16th Finance Commission has a vision of economic convergence. So if we follow that economic convergence, that's well and fine. Otherwise, it's going to be very political.
Too much of competitive federalism.
Yeah, of course, it's going to be competitive federalism, but so far, it's a cooperative federalism that holds our country together.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, but what happens is that Finance Commission, you know, there are certain inbuilt rules which tell you that you are going to be eligible for certain kind of grants if you behave in a certain way, right? So, into that kind of fiscal discipline. What I'm saying is market discovery here, Latha, is not limited to the commercial banks. But the fact that today, in the name of equity, we are basically, I think we are, it's the well-run, well-managed states financially, which are sort of cross-subsidizing the others. And this conversation has not even made it to the table. Right?
No, actually, one of the Niti Aayog officials said that he was speaking to the Foxconn guys and trying to tell them to invest up north. That man said, I can go up to Telangana. So, I mean, he was not even willing to
I'm
discuss
actually
about-
surprised. I would like to know who at Niti said this. Because you know where you are attracting some of the biggest investments today? Guess? You had yesterday the NSE chair tell you where has equity market growth the biggest in number of investors?
Uttar Pradesh.
UP. So, I mean, these kind of, you see, you media guys, Latha, that's why I'd like to know. Tell me later, who is this Niti, whoever is saying this?
I'll definitely tell you.
Because this north-south nonsense it's just it's a parody. I mean, come on. We know there is
didn't utter those two words at all.
East-west divide is there. Because that is where policy matters. Right? We have concentration of poverty on the east. Your industrialization is concentrated on the west. That is where economic policy, now we have to think a great deal. But this north-south is just bizarre. And these kind of anecdotes make it even more...
But I think, Shamika, the 15th Finance Commission tried to balance both. So I'm sure 16th also will do that. Don't worry.
It's a very precise DOR for the 16th
I
Finance
take your point
Commission.
that
it's
making it too competitive can have its problems. Okay, I will have to call it a day out of consideration for panelists who have extended their deadlines by about 10-15 minutes. They have a flight to catch. But thank you very much, Lekha, Shamika, Professor Sheel, Professor Bhanumurthy, and Soumya.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. If Mr. Khara can please come and hand over the mementos once again.